What a week it's been. I hope you had a pair of these glasses and were able to see the eclipse on Monday. Do you ever wish that you had a pair of glasses that would allow you to see things that you otherwise couldn't see, especially the minds of other people who you just can't understand? Why do they think the way they think? Why do they believe the way they believe? I always thought if we just had some special glasses and we could see into somebody's heart or soul or mind and be able to grasp a little bit more about what they are really trying to say, because sometimes some people, what they think, what they believe just boggles the mind. Well, I do want to say that the eclipse got me thinking about how we can let smaller things in our lives get in front of and obstruct more important, more beautiful, more vital things, and can block out the light and the beauty of relationships or people or other things like that. I actually feel like this country is more divided right now than it's ever been in my lifetime. I just feel like there's so much division and brokenness and conflict that it's amazing. And it's not just in the country, it's even within our congregation here at times. One member of this church who I've traveled with to Europe and across the world has resigned last spring from the church due to feeling politically alienated from the church because he's an ardent Trump supporter. And he said it wasn't so much what he was hearing from the pulpit, but in too many interactions with members, he told me, he felt that his opinions were unwelcome and unappreciated. Now, he was a very active member of this church and a leader for over 20 years. To make it worse, he's an agnostic and a free religious thinker. So if he doesn't have a home at a Unitarian Universalist church, he really doesn't have a community to go to on Sunday morning that really understands and affirms his way of thinking and believing. And I have to say, it breaks my heart that he felt so discounted and so disconnected after the recent election that he felt he had to leave this community. There is a particular kind of difficulty right now with the divisions that we're having across this society that seem to be tearing up even long-standing relationships. I see how easy it is for me and for others to let political arguments and other, as I say, smaller divisions get in the way of much bigger and more important aspects of our lives.
The divisions are really painful. But it can be hard to tell what the small things are these days. There seems to be so much at stake. A different member came to talk to me recently because she was thinking about pulling away from her family, really pulling away from her parents, because they were disagreeing so often and so deeply about things that mattered so much to her. It's almost as if she was wondering if it was time to divorce her parents. That's what it felt like. Except that she has a child, and the love between her parents and her daughter is so strong and so beautiful. The thought of the adults' political differences eclipsing that precious love was also terrible. As terrible as listening to them, her parents express their views about race and religion. And she's not the only one today. I know she's not alone. I know some of you are struggling with things like this in your own homes. There are civil wars taking place in our own homes today, not just in our big cities or in our nation's capital.
So, I mean, when we think about what are some of the examples of ways in which we all can and people are letting smaller things eclipse the larger, more important things in their lives, I think of coworkers who let their political opinions keep them from developing a stronger connection or a friendship.
And Marlin and I have talked about families that let religious differences let them become separate, grow more and more apart from each other.
And married couples sometimes will allow some event in the past or something that occurred between them or in their life from the past keep them from being able to deepen and stay together, sometimes even destroying the future of their family.
And in churches, we've seen, you may have been parts of churches where people have divided, congregations have divided over something as simple as color of the paint on the walls in the sanctuary, or in our case, the decision to relocate.
So our nation is becoming divided right now. The new sort of cultural wedge issues include things like the Confederate statues, things like identity politics or freedom of speech, and other kinds of new, as I say, culture wars that we're experiencing.
And we agree that our message today can be summarized this way: conflict is not the end of the story. It's a necessary part of getting to something new. I know some of you take notes, so if you're taking notes, write this one down. Conflict is not the end of the story. It's a necessary part of getting to something new.
So most of us were raised in families where we were taught to get along, try not to be in fights, that conflict is a bad thing. So we sort of have, in many ways, a conflict-averse society, which is ridiculous in a democracy, which is based on the entire idea of competing opinions, arguing to come up with the one that does lead us forward. But we've become so segmented in our news and so segmented in other areas of our lives, online and in other ways, that we've become less and less skillful about how to engage in a real conversation across differences. It's true in Washington, D.C., it's true around water coolers at work, it's true on our Facebook pages, on our computers, that we more often fail to be able to succeed in having constructive conversations.
So how about we stop talking, you and I right now, and give these good people an example. You okay?
That's a good idea. What do you want to fight about?
How about Confederate monuments?
All right.
Or even better, how about whether or not we should change the name of Robert E. Lee Elementary School?
Fine, I'll take the side of defending the school name.
Okay, you're defending the school name. I got to get into character here. You're defending keeping the name.
Absolutely, Robert E. Lee.
How can you be so heartless? Don't you see how mean that position is? Are you telling me you want to make African American children go to a school that was named for a person who fought to keep black people enslaved? Really? And you don't care about what their parents think or feel, how they feel dropping their kids off at a school, parents who are experiencing racism every day of their lives. Do you care how they feel?
Sure, I care, but it's part of the history of this country. You can't change history, and our history in this country is full of people who took risks and who fought hard for what they believed was right for this country in their times, and that's what they were doing. They were trying their hardest to be the best they could be, and you can't just wipe away what happened. It's the truth, and it's not going to fix anything. In fact, I think it's going to make things worse.
I'm not talking about erasing history. You can't erase history. History is history. But these monuments across the South, they weren't even erected after the Civil War. They were erected in the early 20th century during Jim Crow to reinforce segregation, right? To intimidate people. And the school was built at a time when Tulsa was completely segregated. Classrooms and bathrooms and drinking fountains were totally separate. People actually believed that black people were inferior to white people. So how? I don't get it. How in 2017, this is the 21st century, you can be okay with sending African American children to a school that was built for white families and not be open to the idea of changing the name. It seems like you're just kind of cruel.
You know what, Barbara? you're really the one who's being pretty cruel and someone who you don't really get it. Because if you're going to basically call me a racist, then how can we even have a conversation?
I don't know. It just seems like you are, if you're not personally a racist, like you're encouraging racist ideas by not listening.
Not listening? I don't even want to talk to you. You act all open-minded and inclusive, but you can't even have an honest conversation about this without playing the race card or demeaning my intentions or demeaning me as a person.
I can't have an open conversation. You're not listening to me. You don't understand the impact of your position. You just don't get it.
All right, cut. So often these debates, they become personal so quickly, just like that one. And all of a sudden, people are shutting down because they don't want to share what they really think if someone's going to just debase them as a person and accuse them of being a racist or an awful person or this, that, or the other. So, what's the point of getting in a conversation? Why should I share what I really think about something if I'm just going to be called names? So one person shuts down, and then we're not having a conversation. There's no exchange of ideas. There's no opportunity to persuade one another to find a deeper truth.
Sometimes they're shutting down. If we had kept going, we might have gotten into something you might find yourself doing, yelling, slamming doors, starting to actually call each other names or put each other down. Silence, shutting down, and those kinds of verbal violence are both the enemies of creative conflict. Silence and verbal violence are both the enemies of creative conflict. And creative conflict depends on conversation. And conversation is an art. And it's an art we're not really practicing too much these days because we spend more and more time on our phones, on our screens, with all these distractions. We're not having as many civil conversations with each other as we used to.
So the best way to have a really good conversation is to create a pool of meaning, if you will, this sort of pool in between you that you're both putting in as much information as you can to try to understand each other's positions, to try to understand where the person's coming from, and then from that place trying to figure out if there's any common ground or any way to go forward. But if a person doesn't feel safe in the conversation, then obviously they're not going to be very forthcoming with what they think, and there's not going to be any shared understanding.
So why don't we try again? And this time we'll see if we can't create more of this pool of meaning or shared understanding between us. I think he's afraid now.
All right.
He's a little hesitant. You notice that? So why don't you go first this time?
Okay. So a lot of people grew up with Robert E. Lee as, being seen as a true gentleman, an honorable person who was a leader and a significant character in the story of American history. He represents the pride of people in the South, in the southern part of the United States, very proud of the culture that was created, many aspects of the culture.
I hear you. I hear that people who are part of that history are proud of him as a leader, but still, the way I see it, he's famous for turning his back on Abraham Lincoln, one of our greatest presidents ever, and he's famous for siding with the rebellion that sought to break up the United States, that threatened our country. The way I see it, he's a traitor. Everyone who works for the federal government today takes an oath to protect the Constitution in our country, and he broke that oath. And it led to the needless death of hundreds of thousands of American young men. How can that be a good thing, something that we lift up and honor? And and there's that other argument, I know you're going to come with this one, he's a man of his times and we have to respect him for being a man of his times, but there were lots of people in his times who had already determined that slavery was unjust and evil. So why would we hold him up as a hero or a great leader today? I can't support it, and I'm going to protest it.
Think about it, Barbara. Even today, we have two political parties that have two different opinions on lots of issues. So you take climate change. You have one party that believes that it's human created. We need to do everything we can to stop it, or it's going to destroy the world as we know it. Another party that doesn't believe in it and doesn't think we need to work towards it because it's not man-made. We have one party that believes that women should have the free right to have an abortion, and others who believe that that's wrong, that it's murder, that they shouldn't. We have parties that believe that deportation of illegal immigrants needs to happen and happen quickly and by any means necessary, and others that don't. So we have all of this, but in the long arc of history, some of these issues people may look back someday and say that's immoral, what they were doing, what they were advocating for, that it damaged the nation or it harmed people or the world. But I hope that we won't be chiseling the names of our great leaders who went into public service to try to do their best to further what America stands for, taking the names of presidents off buildings and other people because of a policy position that they thought in their times made the most sense, and they were trying to do their best with it. I mean, think of President Truman, who dropped a nuclear bomb twice on Japan, killing tens of thousands of people, innocent men, women, and children. Will a future generation turn him into a villain and no longer recognize him as a valued president? I think this is a very slippery and very dangerous slope, and it does not teach our children the true history of this country. We can't hide from our history. It is what it is. We can't judge people of the past based on the values of today.
There's a lot, there's a deep and complicated past that we have to repent for. I could probably go on arguing that point, but I do see that you've thought about it a lot, and you're giving me some things to think about, and I see you do care. It's not because you don't care that you're arguing on this other side, and I definitely don't want to erase history. I just want us to learn from it. And I think I want you to consider that there are ways to teach the history, all of that history, and not glorify certain leaders, because I'm just worried with what's happening today. I'm worried about the impact on young people and the choices they're faced with. So I think there's a way to teach and learn without glorifying people who maybe really don't need to be lifted up that way. It's true that we all have to live together in this city and in this church, and I want my opinion to be heard, and so I know I need to listen to your point of view.
Well, and vice versa. I know I need to hear what you're saying. It does make me think about how to impact on other people. So I guess we'll have to agree to disagree right now, but I hope we'll stay in conversation. Deal?
Deal.
All right.
Deal.
What? You got more to say. I don't want to stop you.
So there's something else I want to say, and I think this is the right time to say it, which is, it's not just about agreeing to disagree. It's not just about agreeing to disagree. It's that it's so easy to get stuck and in our positions, and that my real hope comes because I think when we can make enough space and not react in the old ways, that in that space between us that's respectful, maybe passionate, maybe angry, something new, we might see something new we've never seen before, right? Maybe there's a solution, there's a way of remembering history and telling the truth and hearing each other that we've never done before, right? Maybe there's something we can do in this church or in this city that's never happened, that really could take us forward.
I appreciate that, because I do know from arguing with you many times that even when I lose, I win, because I've learned something new. It's helped me have a better position, a better understanding of what's going on. And so I like that idea of conversation and conflict. It's not a war between us, but it's actually a seeking of the truth. And so I really do appreciate it. And I also realize too that because we really can't control, we can advocate, we can try to make change, we can vote, we can do those kinds of things, but we can't control the outcome. So it's crazy for us to get divided and hate each other and not speak to each other because we hold these opinions that are just playing out in the world, and they exist.
Right. I want to do it differently, so I'll shake on that.
All right.
Okay.
Good. So speaking of staying in conversation, I wonder if you've heard of a man named Daryl Davis. He's a musician who's African American, and he's made a mission of trying to meet and talk with members of the Ku Klux Klan. Someone's calling. See, these little things eclipse my message. If we let it. So it started some years ago with Daryl Davis. He's a musician, so he's playing in a bar, and after one of his sets, he went to sit down. This white gentleman came over to talk to him, and he said, "Oh man, your music was great, and it reminded me of some musicians that I've listened to." And they start talking, and he realized that this gentleman, he's almost 60 years old, this was the first time he'd ever had a conversation with an African American. And he realized, how is that possible, right? As an African American, he's had many conversations with white people. He couldn't imagine somebody could have lived all the way to 60, never having had a conversation with someone who's African American. So then this man eventually revealed in the conversation that he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And they agreed, these two men, to meet again, and eventually this man renounced the Ku Klux Klan and the ideology of white supremacy. Now, you might think that this is just an exception or an aberration, but he's since gone out and built relationships with more and more people who are members of the Ku Klux Klan, and to date, he has gotten over 200 members of the Klan to give up their affiliation and their association. It's pretty amazing. He actually collects when they give it up, many of them give them their uniform, and so he has this incredible collection of different uniforms. He's even gotten one Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan to give up and give him his uniform and give up the ideology. He does it by building relationships. He said, when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting. It's when the talking ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. If you spend 5 minutes with your worst enemy, he says, it doesn't have to be about race, it could be about anything. In 5 minutes, you'll find that you both have something in common, if you're trying, and you build upon those commonalities, you form a relationship, and as you build the relationship, you're forming a friendship. That's what would happen. He says, I don't convert anybody. They saw the light and converted themselves. So I'm not expecting you or anybody to run out of church this morning and go make friends with a neo-Nazi. That's not my point. But we should be able to learn something from this story that can give us inspiration to stay in relationship with others in our own lives with whom we may strongly disagree.
The member who I mentioned earlier, who I said was ready to get divorced from her parents when she came to see me, gave me permission to share the rest of her story. When she came to see me, she had already made an appointment with a counselor for her husband and her to go together with her parents to see if they couldn't work through the issues. The session, she told me afterwards that the session with the counselor wasn't really that helpful. It really just reinforced the divisions and the points of view. Their worldviews were far apart. There was a gap in understanding between the generations, and her grief was still really real. But she was somehow prepared for that disappointment. And we talked about how one of the most positive or helpful things that happened in her time with me when we were together in my office is that she was moved to tears when she talked about the possibility of completely cutting off from her parents. I remember her sort of pointing at her eyes and saying, this is hopeful, as she felt the tears on her face, that I still care. She said, because I wasn't even sure I cared anymore. So what's happened is she's been able to set boundaries around the relationships, and she's been able to support her daughter's relationship with her parents. So far it's working, and it's really not just working. So it's more than working. It's really been successful. So I want to read from this email from this member who writes, "In fact, there's been more division over the issues. However," and this is a big however, "I'm at peace. I've slept at night. My daughter feels comfortable staying with them occasionally and knows what she believes. Therefore, my goal of maintaining their relationship is being met. You gave me permission to love my parents on a different level and to be patient. Love is sometimes messy, and there are a lot of gray areas. I appreciate you helping me understand that it doesn't have to be perfect, and that I can vehemently disagree with my parents while still loving them. I can still be true to my spirituality of loving beyond belief while also having the courage to work against what I feel is morally wrong. I can stand up to my parents and still be kind to them."
So it's interesting right now for me as the parent of a teenager to think about this, because teenagers by nature are beginning to form their own opinions and form their own identity. And it's tough as a parent. I know I'm speaking to many who've been through this. We're used to our children learning from us and listening to us and often agreeing with us much of the time until they hit this stage of adolescence. In fact, until this age, we can send them to their room until they agree with us. But I have to remind myself sometimes that it's developmentally appropriate and that it's what we want for our children. We want them to develop their own sense of self and independence and identity. That's the only way that they can break out into the world and be fully formed adults. But oh, is it hard when suddenly your child begins to disagree seemingly with everything you say. Now, with our children, of course, we typically stay in relationship with them through all of this disagreement and difference. And if we live long enough, if we all live long enough, then in many cases we eventually come together and have an adult connection, even though we don't think exactly alike and we have our own ways of seeing things. So it's just one example of how conflict is not the end of the story, but conflict is a road towards something new.
And it's also why we're suggesting this week that you practice the art of conversation, even or maybe especially with people you disagree with, because we know we only get good at things that we practice. And God, or love, can really only keep speaking into our lives if we keep speaking. And we know that amazing things happen when there's enough open space in our own hearts or out in outer space. So make sure you give yourself and each other enough space and time for the conversation. Don't do anything unsafe. But sometimes when it seems that the light is about to disappear forever, that's actually when a moment of transformation is near. And often the deeper the conflict is, the greater the opportunity for significant change there is. So practice the art of conversation this week. Remember, conflict is not the end of the story. It's a necessary part of getting to something new, a new understanding, a new relationship, a new reality. Violence takes hold when words no longer work. So let's keep talking.
Yes. And we do have a tool to be able to see what other people's in their mind and what's in their hearts, and it's called conversation if we learn how to do it well, and boy does our world need it. So let's try our best. Amen.
We're so happy you're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving, so please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
Love BB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256 or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed
and be a blessing.